I think we always realized that we are not a nation state at all, but we are a civilizational state. Because our civilization is the civilization of Bharatvarsha. The main theme of this Bharat book is that we need a new constitution. And I also do not feel, Piotr, that we will go for an official change. Many things that the BJP has been doing is they float an idea. I think now there is a gradual reawakening and we're trying to figure out who we are. And a certain measure of self-confidence is coming to a people.
This is The Global Gambit. Welcome back, everyone. This is another Gambit episode, but this time around we're talking about India. Or is it Bharat? And as you could probably tell from that introduction, very brief introduction, we are talking about this recent, very interesting revelation that came out a few days ago in the run-up to the G20 summit hosted in India, or Bharat, by the Prime Minister, Modi, in that the invitations that were sent out caused quite a stir, because in a lot of them, they stared from the Prime Minister of Bharat. Now, this is something that has quite a few different connotations to it, and being that this is a largely international podcast, I want to keep that in mind when we talk about these things, because some people within the country who have greater affiliations with the country will be more aware of that. I largely look at India in the context of great power competition and the broader geopolitical dynamics. But joining me this time around to talk about this is Gautam Desiraju. I practiced that before I said it, so I hope. He's an Indian structural chemist, an educationalist, and a professor at the Indian Institute of Science. But more specifically relating to this conversation, he's also the author of a really interesting book that I heard him speaking about Bharat, India 2.0. which is his emphasis that India has a strong ability to make great use of Bharat and help bring around a sort of new relevance and importance of India in the international sphere, as well as internally. So we're going to be talking a bit more about what Bharat is, where it comes from, the feasibility of doing it, and also just how it plays into the broader sort of narrative of countries changing their names. We've seen Turkey do this last year, and also the Czech Republic. But thank you so much for joining the show, Gautam. It's lovely to have you with us. I guess my first question for you is, could you take us through a little bit what is Bharat 2.0 in your mind, and why should my audience, why should the international audience be aware of this?
Thank you, Piotr, for these kind words of introduction. And I'm pleased to be on your podcast today. I think it will be an interesting experience to try to explain the concept of Bharat to a foreign audience. As my book title shows, Bharat, India 2.0. In other words, Bharat is the India 2.0 as opposed to India, which was India 1.0. Now, I think a little explanation is in order, because most foreigners are perhaps not aware of the term Bharat at all. But it is the word for our country in almost every Indian language. The word India is never used by us when we speak in our languages. But before we get to Bharat, let me just spend a couple of minutes in telling you about India. It is almost totally acknowledged that the word India comes from the word Sindhu. And Sindhu is the Sanskrit name for what is today called the river Indus. Even here could be a doubt that according to the Vedas, which are about 5,000 years old, Sindhu might not even be the modern name Indus, but a whole system of tributaries of an ancient river called Saraswati, which has vanished. And there is good geological evidence as to where this vanished river was, but it is somewhere in western India of today. Well, whatever it is, this Sindhu, people who lived east of the Sindhu were called Hindus. By who? By the Persians. And when Alexander came to India to try to invade, he is supposed to have stopped at the banks of the Sindhu and decided not to go further east. So traditionally, people this side are called Hindus. So the word Hindu has no religious connotation. This is another important thing. A Hindu is anybody who lives this side of the river Indus. the sa sound in Sanskrit becomes the ha sound in Persian. So Sindhu became Hindu. It then led to the word Hindustan, which is an old Muslim word that describes India. The language Hindi is also derived from the same etymological root. When the Greeks came here, they found a plant which grew only in this part of the world, and they called it indigo. And that indigo was very precious and very valuable in the time of the Greeks and the Roman Empire. So, any of these words that have this IND somewhere in them refer to this part of the world east of the modern river Indus, shall we say. The word India, however, is quite new. And this was completely a creation of the British when they first came to the subcontinent. Now let us go to Bharat. Now Bharat is much, much older than India. And it comes from two scriptural works, the Vedas, the oldest of them being the Rig Veda, which people say is roughly about 4000 BC. So it refers to this landmass called Bharata Varsha, and this Bharata Varsha is described in greater detail in a book called the Vishnu Purana, and this came about 1000 years after the Vedas. Now Vishnu Purana simply says that Bharat is all the land that lies between the ocean and the mountain, where the happy children of Bharata live. So Bharata was a king who probably ruled a small kingdom somewhere in present-day North India near Delhi maybe. So the happy children of Bharata lived in this place, and it is supposed to be an island which has trees of a certain type with very sweet fruits. So it has great religious and now more important civilizational importance, because this what we are calling Bharata Varsha is, typically speaking, everything that lies between modern day Afghanistan and modern day, shall we say, Indonesia, Singapore and so on, Sri Lanka on this side, and actually parts of Central Asia, the tips of Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, little bit north of the Pamir Mountains. So all these places are extensively referred to in our ancient scriptures, and they are still used in modern chants and scriptures as they are delivered in temples today. These names are still used and everybody knows what they mean. Mm-hmm. Now, the next thing is, since you say that these people in this podcast are interested in geopolitical things, the fact of the matter is that India is now in a process where, because of the British or the hasty way in which they left the country, leaving us with a constitution, which many people say is in many ways a copy of the constitution of many other countries. The main theme of this Bharat book is that we need a new constitution, which is why many people have told me they're quite amused to see the government talking about the name change. They're asking, did the Prime Minister read your book? So I have no idea whether he read the book or not.
That's a good marketing.
Maybe he did, because it's selling quite well. I should confess.
Well,
it's selling better than what I thought it would.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. It'll be in the description of the conversation.
People in foreign countries, it's available on Kindle, by the way.
It will be available. The link to it will be in the description.
The main theme of this thing is that India as such represents us as a nation state,
right,
more on the Westphalian model, which is what the British were comfortable with. And we are now realizing, I think we always realized that we are not a nation state at all, but we are a civilizational state, because our civilization is the civilization of Bharatvarsha, and our religion, which is wrongly called Hinduism, but correctly called Sanatana Dharma, the eternal Dharma, Dharma being that which sustains the whole world.
Yes.
So our religion itself is based on very, very different principles, and half the reason I think foreigners have never bothered to try to understand us or couldn't understand us is because we are a civilizational state. There are two big civilizational states in the world today, China and India. And both these are now becoming strong economically. So I think there is now, for the first time, an interest in figuring out who these people are. Indians, or as we would like to call ourselves, Bharatiyas. And what is it that makes them different from?
Countries change their names for a variety of reasons. They can be political, economic, cultural. It seems to be a multitude of all of those factors in this case, but largely driven by the historical significance of the name. And you mentioned the religious, the geo-religious elements as much as the geopolitical. But just to play devil's advocate for the conversation, there's been criticisms amongst some who see it as a potential to try and erase the Muslim Mongols who ruled the country for about 300 years, I believe. I remember reading one article from one tweet or post by Shashi Tharoor, if I'm saying that right. He said there's no constitutional objection to calling India Bharat, which is one of the country's two official names. I hope the government will not be foolish as to completely dispense with India. So their main point is about branding. So some people see this as an effort to sort of suppress or reduce the amount of relevance that different ethnicities or groups within the country have had in the history of the country. I know you're going to disagree.
No, I disagree totally. But you did say you are playing devil's advocate. No, India is 84% Sanatani. And it is about, I don't use the word Hindu at all. So I call it Sanatani. We are 84% Sanatanis. We are about 12 to 13% Muslims. And 1 or 2% Christians, Buddhists, Sikhs, other people. So I thoroughly and vigorously disagree with everything that Tharoor says because his statements are all politically motivated. And you don't go and change countries' names because of the preferences of a political party. And the Congress party, of which he is a member, have been notorious for Muslim appeasement in our country for the last 75 years. Don't forget, there was this heavy shadow of partition. And this is a traumatic event which pervades the life of both countries, India and Pakistan today. And it was a very unfortunate thing that happened. And when partition did happen, more Muslims stayed in India than opted to go to Pakistan and Bangladesh. This is a fact that most people do not appreciate. So the percentage of people who went was much smaller. And whereas Muslims have continued to live here, we have 220 million of them. All the Hindus in Pakistan were more or less expelled. So this was not a very sort of symmetrical way of doing things. What has now happened is that it's very unsymmetrical and it is unfortunate. But if you look at events in Pakistan today, it's very, very interesting. I don't know if some of your viewers will see some of the recent podcasts in Pakistan, especially after our successful moon launch, Chandrayaan-3, which is quite a nice technical feat. I mean, we are the fourth country to be able to do this. I was just joking, and maybe Tharoor should feel that we'll take their Muslims and send them our Muslims. So you have to remember that we are 84% Sanatani. And many of us have a complaint that the Congress governments over the decades have continually discriminated against a majority community and pampered the minorities to ludicrous extents. And I think what Mr. Modi for all that is not discriminating against Muslims. But at the same time, this is the political color that has been given by the Congress party, which I think is now, they have only got 55 seats in a lower house of parliament, which has 542 seats. So from a party that had almost limitless power in this country, they've been whittled down to something very small. And today it is widely commented that before long, they will become a party where only Muslims vote for them. So you see, unless you understand this Hindu-Muslim problem in India, one would be very careful to make blanket statements. And it is believed, or many thinking Indians strongly believe, that the American deep state, the Vatican and China are consistently pumping in money into the Congress party to destabilize us. And there is a phrase for it, it's called tukde tukde, to make India into bits, little bits. They have said it openly. So the Bharat name and the India name are much older. Let me assure you that many of us feel very proud of both the names India and Bharat. Tomorrow I would not like to see the Indian Ocean being called Bharatiya Ocean. And I hate that name South Asia, which is an unfair name that has been given by the American think tanks and the universities. I would like it to be called the Indian subcontinent and not the Bharatiya subcontinent, because if the West doesn't do that, the whole thing will be called Bharatvarsha before long. And there's nothing that the rest of the world can do about it for the simple, crude reason that we are becoming a very rich country.
So what about then the motivations behind it, specifically on Modi's side? The BJP's been in power for the best part of 10 years. Some people think
9 years, we have a general election next year.
Yeah, so 9-10 years. And there was one article I was reading for our conversation that sort of mentioned the factor also that the opposition leaders have formed an alliance bloc called India, short for the Indian National Development Inclusive Alliance, which is an effort to remove the BJP from next year. Could you unpack a little bit more about that and if there's any relevance to it? Or is this just more
subtle?
Okay.
It's a very good question. It's a very good question that you've asked. And this India word, I said all of us love that word. We associate with the word India. Okay, how can we not? I mean, we've all grown up thinking of ourselves as Indians. But today, once again, it is the Congress party. They have associated this word India with the small English-speaking minority who live in central Delhi. You might have heard the word Lutyens, Lutyens. Lutyens was the name of the British architect who designed central Delhi. And so when we say the Lutyens gang, we mean a collection of English-speaking Anglophiles strongly supportive of the Congress party who have no link with India at all. Even 20 years back, comments were made in the press that India does not understand Bharat. Bharat is this huge country outside central Delhi. And central Delhi itself became equated as the personal property of the Nehru-Gandhi family. Don't forget that this family, successive generations have ruled this country, starting with Nehru, then Indira Gandhi, then her son Rajiv Gandhi, and now Mr. Rahul Gandhi trying to become the Prime Minister. So there is a general drift in India today, especially after Mr. Modi came to power, that these dynastic parties have seen their natural lifetime, and we don't need dynasties. There are many smaller dynastic parties in India. They have all been voted out of power. So in an aspirational India, where the poorest of people from the villages can aspire to good and big things, the idea of a hereditary succession is abhorrent. It's anti-democratic. And Mr. Tharoor, who talks with this wonderful English accent, forgets that he is actually supporting a dynastic. It would have been a monarchy. There are articles I have written 20 years ago that if they had won the 2014 election, we would have actually become an outright monarchy. It was heading to that point. So Modi doesn't represent a political interest, but the reason he got re-elected with a bigger majority in 19 than in 14 itself says that it doesn't say anything great about the BJP or Modi himself. It simply says that we, the people of India, knew ourselves much better. We are finally beginning to realize that we are Bharatiyas and that we are not Indians. And putting it another way, you talk about the Persians, you talk about the British. Yes, they are outsiders. All the Muslims here are outsiders because they came as invaders. They didn't come with any peaceful purpose. Subsequently, they converted and local people, became Muslims. Everybody was not thing. Don't forget our economy has been growing really fast and the average income has doubled in the 9 years that he has come. So a little bit of money has given us a lot of confidence, common Indians. And suddenly we have realized that we were Bharatiyas all along. But a small clique of English-speaking Anglophiles in central Delhi have been ruling us for many, many years. Totally unconnected. Mr. Rahul Gandhi is finally half foreign. He looks, behaves and talks. His body language is that of a European. Most of us don't even think of him as behaving in an Indian way. And so you see, there is a problem. There is a disconnect problem with the Congress party. The Western press, we really laugh at the Washington Post and the New York Times because their coverage has been so biased. And they have no understanding of what is happening in our country. So the only thing we feel is Soros is paying them a lot of money, or the Vatican is paying them a lot of money, or China is paying them a lot of money. And most of these articles in the New York Times and Washington Post are written by people whose names sound Indian. So it's clear that they've got a few people and probably they're paying them money, I think. This is what it is. And so they'll write, if you pay somebody something, he or she will do anything. So most of us don't take these articles very seriously.
I prefer to read around a subject like, read about things from an Al Jazeera point of view, or I do read a couple of Indian newspapers occasionally to see what the perspective is saying. To the broader point about Modi, the BJP, National Congress has described them as, quote, distraction tactics, and a large proportion of these renamings that the Modi government has been doing, they've been replacing symbols, removing symbols of India's past Muslim and British rulers, which a lot of people welcome, but other people criticize or claim that by doing that you're making it harder for the country to market itself, and it's still a part of the history, and therefore you shouldn't. One person was equating it to when people are taking down the statues and the BLM movement. If you remove a statue, well, that's not. Yes, you remove the statue, but you're not going to change the past. So you might as well keep the statue and just educate people from them. Is that not something that people who are strongly in favour of renaming the country, they don't see it in such a way? They think it's daft.
I mean, I certainly agree with you in part. I mean, I was really pained to see the people removing statues of Abraham Lincoln in the US, because he is a person for whom I have the greatest respect and always have. I believe he is truly one of the, great men who have strode across the political scene in the last 200-300 years. So that somehow pained me at a fundamental level. Now, about changing names, we keep changing names. Peking became Beijing. 8 or 9 countries have changed their names. Article 1 of our constitution says India, that is Bharat. So the very first article of the constitution, which gives the name of the country, really equates the two. India, that is Bharat, means India is a subset of Bharat. That's why I say I cannot deny the name India. Again and again, I'm sorry to mention the Congress party only, but they are the ones who have wrongly conflated this idea of, statues of the old kings and queens of England have been removed all over India. Except in Kolkata, many English names for streets have been removed. They have been changed. Madras became Chennai. Many smaller places have changed their names from what the British used to call them. And what the British called them were actually corruptions of older Indian names which the British could not pronounce properly. There are many generations now for whom Britain means nothing. Absolutely nothing. Yesterday we had the Prime Minister of Britain, a Hindu, who is a proud Hindu, coming and doing a regular worship for 45 minutes in a big temple in Delhi. So when you see things like that, a person, people who live in some Colonel Blimp kind of world, literally worshipping some old imperial England is what they are doing. And I think this goes like most people don't even know what Britain is. So that way I must say that the colonial baggage, as it says, is gone. It's going and it's practically not there. So this is more a political thing because the election is coming next year, and this I full stop, N full stop, D full stop thing was a kind of a silly effort. I don't think they realized that it would lead to this. Maybe I don't think Modi decided on this Bharat thing because they named that. He is too astute a politician to do short-term things. And I also do not feel, Piotr, that we will go for an official change. Many things that the BJP has been doing is they float an idea and they just allow this idea to keep moving. Like one of the things you might know, which is a connected thing, is what is called the Uniform Civil Code. So in this Uniform Civil Code, what we all want is, you see, Hindus follow a very secular set of rules, which a set of laws that was passed in 56, that removed many of the old Hindu things from the personal laws. Laws regarding marriage, inheritance, land, wills, estate duties. All the things that used to be done before have been scrapped, and it's much more a secular thing. Do you know that the Muslims still follow their personal law for civil matters? Do you know that it is only in India that a Muslim is officially allowed to have 4 wives? These are things that are not well known. Even in Pakistan they are not allowed, nor in Bangladesh. So this is what we mean by appeasement of this community. They are officially allowed to have 4 wives. And this is, whereas we don't want 4 wives. So Indians were allowed to have more than 1 wife, but we happily changed in 1956. So these are all parts of a big country changing. When big countries change, it happens in little ways because the momentum is so huge that nobody wants to have drastic changes in India.
Big
The
change.
most populous country in the world. So I think everything is going to happen slowly. And Modi's methodology is not to push something abruptly on this big country because it's a very diverse place.
So
We are not one huge monolith.
let's talk numbers practicality for a second then. In the run up to our conversation, I was reading some different pieces to give me a bit of an overview. You're giving me much more to think about, and I think this is a great conversation. So I hope everyone watching, click that like button if you're enjoying it. But what do you think about the actual feasibility of this? You've sort of admitted that you don't think it's going to happen, but let's role play and pretend that it does. As I say, it would cost India, in an article I read, somewhere in the realm of 140 million dollars to do this. Now that's not the biggest money in the big scheme of things, perhaps, but do you think that not would still be a consideration? And then that does lead me into a final question I have about the Constitution.
There are 2 points in your question. The first is the cost. 140 million or something is nothing for a country that has 600 billion in foreign exchange reserves. India is no more a poor country. So the money factor is not going to matter. But I think there is more a botheration for the common people to go about and get things changed and certificates and this and that. We don't know how many of this will have to change. So there'll be a lot of hassles for people. And as it is, it's already there. If you look at an Indian passport, it says Republic of India in English. But below that, it says Bharat Ganarajya, which means the Republic of Bharat. So already on our passport, the very first cover of the passport has got the word Bharat. So I think many things do not have to be changed. This is why I do not feel Modi will actually go to Parliament and disavow the name India. There is a humorous side to this also, because there is some small elements in Pakistan that are saying that they also are part of the Sindhu.
I read this.
And if India formally gives up this name, we will call ourselves India. And I don't think that is something that any of us wants. In fact, many Indians may actually want the two countries to come together. There is even talk like that if there is so much feeling in Pakistan that partition was a mistake and that it was an artificial thing put up by the British and the Americans just to help them in the Cold War. And Modi, one of the big things he's done is starting this new train from India to Europe via a sea route to Arabia and then the Middle East and then going up, which is really cut a lot of the thunder out of the Belt and Road program of China.
Yeah,
so you see, from Southeast Asia, we can go all the way to Europe in a very cheap way. And I think some of these economic things, I wouldn't be surprised at all, Piotr, if in 10, 15 years, there'll be a lot of realignment of political borders in this part of the world. If you ask me, a greater India or something going up to the original bank of the Indus is not at all such an unlikely scenario. Who says these political borders are there forever? When they started Yugoslavia, it lasted not even 60 years. West and East Germany were two countries and then they came together. So I am not very worried about that. And so I think you cannot look at all these things without looking at the Hindu-Muslim problem and without looking at partition.
No, absolutely. I think that the partition element, what the British did in this part of the world and then in the Middle East as well, much of the modern day issues in the Middle East are due to the very arbitrary lines that the British predominantly drew in those sub-regions.
Yeah, wherever they drew lines, those lines served an immediate political purpose, that's all.
Yeah, so I think it'd be very interesting to see if there were a redrawing of the lines and absorption, an additional partition in this sort of thing. But that leads me to my last question, actually, which was then you phrased this or framed this in the context of India, Bharat needing a new version of a constitution. But just to broaden that out a little bit as well, you've talked about the rejection and removal of the British and English and colonial elements, but then does that not mean India should go back to a greater pre-colonial time and break the country up into the kingdoms that existed before as well? Surely that the idea of India and its large current, including things like the legal system or the English schools, are, part of that time. If you're going to reject the British, name, shouldn't you reject more things as well? Or is it more that the name is more of a identity and therefore it's significant?
You are correct. You are absolutely correct. What we are asking for is a Bharatiya constitution. And one of the things I have asked for is for small states. We have only 28 states today. I have asked for 75.
Wow.
Which more correctly represents the diversities, the old geography, the old culture, the old history of this country. And yes, it will be loosely federal, with the central government being responsible for defense, foreign affairs, managing of currency, and with the individual small states having considerable economic powers, much like how we were governed before the Muslims came here 1200 years ago. Don't forget, India was a very, very rich country then. Continued to be rich almost till 1500, after which so many institutions were destroyed by the Muslims that, the British just came and finished the job. So it's a country that has seen a lot of sorrow for about 1200 years. I think now there is a gradual reawakening and we're trying to figure out who we are. And a certain measure of self-confidence is coming to a people. Most foreigners do not know, they do not appreciate. And Indians being very quiet and not willing to talk about themselves too much in foreign countries. I think largely we remained an unknown factor as long as we were not a very rich country. Now that the country is becoming strong economically, everybody says we will be a 10 trillion economy by 2030, which is only 7 years from now. See, when the time we become a 10 trillion economy, we can pretty much do what we want to do. Like in the G20, we treated Canada very badly because of their funny treatment with these Khalistanis and things like that. So all the leaders were treated well except Mr. Trudeau. And so India has come to a position where it can set the terms and dictate to other countries, which is what all powerful countries do anyway. Britain did that when it had a big empire. The American empire was another big one, which is kind of not as powerful as it was before. And then the Chinese empire, the Indian empire. All these things will come one by one. And I think this is part of the dynamics of geopolitics throughout the world. And I think the new thing is that we will all have to learn to live together, not try to dominate one another. And I think that's what Modi was saying in G20 also, when he says one world, one family, one future, and so on. And that's where our old religion of Sanatana Dharma, which says that the whole world is one and thinks about living, non-living things, plant life, human beings, weather, environment, everything is taken as a complete whole. And that is what distinguishes us from the other major faiths. And Sanatana Dharma, finally, my final comment, it is a religion, it is not just a way of life. And it's just that the word religion means something totally different here from what it means anywhere else in the world. But we are the biggest country in the world. So the world, for its own economic benefit, will have to worry a little bit about how we think. Because this is something, I've been in the West 50 years now, and I have never talked about my feelings as an Indian or a Bharatiya to any Westerner, although I have dealt with so many of them as colleagues. And as you know, I'm a well-known chemist, and I have done many things in my subject. But this is one topic that even I never felt like opening up. But I've sent my book to some of my very good friends in Italy, Germany, and so on. And all of them said, because they know me very well. So they said, now we understand more things about you. And so I would like Westerners to find out a little bit more about India, find out about Bharat, and start thinking a little bit about this strange group of 1.4 billion people who are so different from anyone else in the world.
I very much appreciate those last words. Hopefully this has been an enjoyable experience for you, where we have a hopefully international audience, and this podcast is truly international. The idea of the global gambit is to be global, and to hear from voices that are non-Western.
It's been really enjoyable talking to you, Piotr.
Thank you very much. I appreciated it. And,
this is the first time I'm addressing a predominantly Western audience. So if some of the things I said sounded strange, well, let them be like that. Please don't believe that it's not at all like what it's here.
No, absolutely, and that's the point. We want to be exposed to new ideas and keep evolving and growing as people. As in global people, to paraphrase the caption from the G20 summit. But thank you very much, Gautam. Thank you very much for watching, everybody. I want to thank all of those who support the channel, and particularly Matt and other patrons. But until next time, everyone, take care.